My husband and I were on a date when his boss showed up, slammed a folder on our table, and said, "You really thought you'd get away with this?" I glanced at my husband, who was already sweating, and asked, "Should I call the IRS now or after dessert?" His hands started to shake. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to sit across from her husband in a quiet Italian restaurant and watch his entire world unravel with the slam of a folder. But life has a way of creeping up behind you, whispering secrets you didn't want to hear, until it's too loud to ignore. That evening started just like any other Friday night. I had chosen Fiore's, the place with the warm lighting and the servers who always seemed to remember your name even if you hadn't been in for months. It had been a long week, and I had suggested we take some time to reconnect, to sit down and actually talk instead of passing each other like ghosts in our own home. Terrence, my husband of 15 years, had dressed up more than usual. He wore the dark blazer I had bought him 2 birthdays ago, and his cologne, a scent I hadn't smelled in weeks, lingered faintly in the air between us. "I figured we could use a little romance," he said, smiling, settling into the booth across from me. I returned his smile, but something about it felt rehearsed, like an actor repeating lines he'd practiced in front of a mirror. I shook it off. Maybe he was just trying. Relationships go through phases, don't they? We'd had our fair share of ups and downs, and I was tired of being suspicious all the time. I wanted to believe this night was about us. Dinner was quiet. We talked about work, about the weather turning cold, about how the kids next door had finally sold their trampoline after 2 summers of non-stop bouncing. It was all small talk. Surface level. But I tried to pull it deeper. "How's everything at the office?" I asked, twirling pasta around my fork. "Busy. A lot of changes lately," he said, looking down at his plate. "Bollinger's getting stricter. Trying to tighten things up before the fiscal year ends." There was a slight tremble in his voice. Just a flicker. "You seem tense," I said gently. He looked up, eyes wide like I'd caught him doing something he shouldn't. Then he forced a laugh. "It's nothing. Just pressure. Deadlines. You know how it is." I nodded slowly, but the unease began to settle in my chest. I'd been feeling it for a while now. Late nights. Passwords changed. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. But every time I brought it up, he made me feel like I was imagining it. He reached across the table, took my hand in his. His palm was damp. "I know I've been distant," he said. "But I want to fix things." "I do." Before I could respond, a loud noise startled us both. A sharp smack, like a gavel striking wood. A thick manila folder landed on our table, sending my glass of water sloshing over the rim. We both looked up at the same time. Standing there, looming like a storm cloud, was his boss. Mr. Ballinger. I'd only met him once, at a company holiday party, but I recognized the square jaw, the tightly combed salt and pepper hair, the expensive coat that still had raindrops clinging to it. "You really thought you'd get away with this?" Ballinger said, his voice low but thunderous. Terrence froze. The color drained from his face, his fingers loosening their grip on mine. My heart thudded in my chest. I looked at the folder, then at Terrence. "Should I call the IRS now or after dessert?" I asked, my voice sharper than I expected. His hands began to shake. For a moment, no one spoke. The restaurant, full of soft clinks of silverware just moments ago, had gone still. A server behind us took a step back. A couple nearby turned in their seats. Ballinger didn't wait for an answer. He pulled out the chair beside us, sat down without invitation, and opened the folder like it was an indictment. He slid the first sheet forward, some kind of financial record. Then another. And another. "I trusted you," he said, his voice barely contained. "Signed off on those reports. Gave you control of accounts you had no business touching." Terrence looked like he was shrinking into his chair. I could see his throat tighten as he swallowed, could hear the faint tremor in his breath. "I don't," he started, but Ballinger cut him off. "Offshore transfers. Fake invoices. A consulting company that doesn't exist. You've been siphoning money for 2 years. You really thought no one would audit the ledgers?" I looked down at the documents. My eyes didn't catch all the details. I'm not a financial analyst, but I saw dates, numbers, red ink. Terms like unauthorized withdrawal and vendor discrepancy. It was real. It was all real. I looked at my husband. This man I had built a life with. Who I had defended, forgiven, doubted myself for. He had taken everything we had and gambled it on a lie. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the papers, as if they were written in another language. You'll be hearing from legal by Monday, Ballinger said, rising. And you might want to talk to a criminal defense attorney. With that, he left. Just walked out, leaving the folder open like a wound on the table. Terrence sat motionless. I sat with him, stunned. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just felt empty. The man I thought I knew, my husband, my partner, had been lying to me, to his company, to everyone. And for what? Greed? Power? A thrill? When we got home that night, I packed a bag. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. He tried to reach out once, touched my arm as I zipped up the suitcase. But I pulled away. I need space, I said. My voice was quieter now. He just nodded. The next few days were chaos. Ballinger filed charges. I had to meet with lawyers. Our accounts were frozen. The house, our home, was put under review. I was pulled into interviews, had to prove I didn't know anything. That I wasn't complicit. And then came the woman. Her name appeared on a transfer sheet buried in the folder. Alina K. Listed as a consultant. $12,000 wired in 2 months. I did some digging. She was 24. An aspiring influencer, all filtered selfies and travel reels. Nothing about her said consultant. I found her GoFundMe, her Instagram, her YouTube channel. I saw the hotels, the clothes, the champagne. My husband had been funding her lifestyle with stolen money. That was when the tears came. Not because of the betrayal. But because I had spent years second-guessing myself, wondering if I was paranoid. I wasn't. I was just married to a man who lied for a living. I confronted him once. Visited him while he was out on bail. He looked tired. Like all the weight he'd been carrying had finally crushed him. You could have just left me, I said. Why destroy everything? I thought I could keep it together, he said. I thought I could protect you from it. I almost laughed. Protect me? He had ruined us. But I didn't say it. I just got up and walked out. The silence that followed that prison visit was louder than any argument we ever had. I went back to the house, not because I wanted to stay, but because the lawyers advised I keep track of all shared property. The house felt like a stranger. Every room echoed with questions I'd never thought to ask. The couch where we watched movies suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. The kitchen island where he used to lean against while pretending to listen, now a stage where he must have stood rehearsing his lies. And our bedroom. I couldn't even bring myself to sleep there. I moved into the guest room, clutching the quilt my late mother made me, the only thing that still felt like home. Days bled into each other, filled with phone calls from attorneys, real estate agents, bank representatives. I had to relive everything with strangers, who was listed on the accounts, who signed what, who knew what and when. I was dissected like a case file. It was humiliating. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what I'd trusted. One afternoon, I sat with my financial advisor, Elaine, who looked at me the way someone looks at a deer caught in a trap. He drained your personal savings, Cass. That account your grandmother helped you start, it's empty, she said gently. I stared at her. Blinked. I hadn't cried in days, and yet suddenly I couldn't stop. Silent, body-racking sobs that made me feel like a child again. Everything my family had ever done for me, everything I had worked toward, all siphoned off for a man-child's ego trip and a girl half his age with glitter eyeshadow and travel sponsorships. I started digging deeper. I requested every document I could. I scoured receipts, scanned through emails, opened browser histories. I couldn't stop myself. The more I learned, the more I realized this had been going on far longer than Ballinger's audit had revealed. He hadn't just cheated his company. He'd taken out credit cards in my name. He'd used our joint account to buy airline tickets to places he said were business retreats. He'd lied to me about everything, my credit, our mortgage, the savings plan for retirement. And all of it was for her. The most humiliating part wasn't even the affair. It was the photos. I found a stash buried in an old Dropbox folder. Him and Alina in the Bahamas. Him and Alina at a rooftop bar in Dallas. Matching watches. Her sitting in his lap, tongue out, drunk and radiant in ways I hadn't been in years. It made me sick. Not just because he betrayed me, but because he was smiling in every photo. Really smiling. The kind of smile he used to give me when we were young and the world was still forgiving. I called him. He was out on bail and staying with his sister in Waltham. He answered on the second ring. I want to ask you one thing, I said, voice calm but sharp. Silence. Was any of it real? A breath. Then, it was all real. I just got lost. I hung up before he could say more. I wasn't interested in apologies built on top of quicksand. I shifted my focus to survival. I started seeing a therapist. I got the locks changed. I put the house up for sale. I even cut my hair, something drastic and uneven and liberating. I volunteered at the shelter down the road, helped bag groceries at the food pantry, just to feel useful again. And I wrote. Every day. Pages and pages of anger and shame and self-blame, and then, slowly, a kind of understanding. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But clarity. One day, I got a message from Alina. It was an Instagram DM, buried among spam and unread requests. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity got the better of me. I didn't know he was married, it read. He told me you were separated. I'm sorry. That was it. Just one line. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't believe her, honestly, I did, but because she wasn't the villain in this story. She was another puppet in his production. Just younger, shinier, more profitable. Her apology didn't heal anything, but it didn't hurt either. It just was. The trial date crept closer. My lawyer, Janice, called me weekly, reminding me of what to expect. She said I'd likely be subpoenaed. That my testimony, even as a victim, could make a difference in the sentencing. Will I have to look at him? I asked. Yes. That night, I sat in the empty guest room, wrapped in my mother's quilt, staring at the pale green walls. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who thought marriage was forever. The one who believed ambition was SXY and that charm meant character. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt resolved. This wasn't just about Terrence. It was about me. About the life I still had, even after he tried to burn it to the ground. The trial was scheduled for late October. By then, the leaves in our neighborhood had turned that deep, burning red that always made me think of endings. Ironic, maybe, how nature mirrored my life so precisely. I was walking around in a body that had known one reality for years and was now waking up in a completely different one. I didn't feel like myself, not really. Not yet. But I was beginning to feel something like control again. My lawyer said my testimony would be brief, procedural. They just needed confirmation that I hadn't been complicit, hadn't forged anything, hadn't participated in the fraud. But even that terrified me. I kept picturing the courtroom, the cold wood paneling, the sound of a gavel cracking through the air, and Terrence sitting just feet away, in a cheap suit that wasn't even his, trying to avoid my eyes. I told myself I didn't care. That I'd be strong. That I'd walk in and walk out and never look back. But it wasn't that simple. The week before the trial, I received a package on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a stack of handwritten letters. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Terrence. I didn't want to read them. I really didn't. But I did. Each letter was dated, going back almost a year. In them, he unraveled himself slowly. He talked about the pressure he felt at work, the envy he harbored toward colleagues who always seemed to get ahead faster. He confessed to starting the fraud out of necessity, which quickly turned into opportunity, and then addiction. That's the word he used, addiction. Not to drugs or alcohol, but to winning. To appearing successful. One letter, near the bottom of the stack, broke me in a way I didn't expect. It said, "You were always enough." I just never believed I was. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't closure. But it was something. And it made me feel, if only for a moment, like maybe I hadn't been completely blind. Maybe the man I loved had existed, once. Even if he'd buried himself under lies. The day of the trial, I wore black slacks and a cream blouse my sister had helped me pick out. Nothing flashy. Just strong. Neutral. I walked into the courthouse with my head up, ignoring the two reporters standing near the entrance. One of them held a notepad. I kept walking. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. The walls were plain, the lighting dull, the seats harder than they looked. I sat in the gallery, beside Janice, clutching a small notepad in my lap even though I wasn't going to write anything. It was something to hold on to. Something that wasn't him. Terrence was led in through a side door. His wrists weren't cuffed, but there was a uniformed officer on either side of him. His suit didn't fit right. He looked thinner, older. Like the lies had eaten away at him from the inside. He glanced at me. Just once. A flicker of recognition. I didn't look away, but I didn't smile either. I gave him nothing. The proceedings were slow, clinical. The prosecutor laid out the timeline, the evidence, the bank statements. Ballinger testified, his voice cold, efficient. There was no room for sympathy in his tone, only anger. Only betrayal. When they called my name, my knees felt like glass. I stood, walked to the stand, and took the oath. My voice didn't shake, but I gripped the edge of the witness box like it might float away from under me. They asked me when I became aware of the fraud. I told them the truth. They asked if I had ever participated, ever knowingly approved false documentation. I said no. They asked if my husband ever discussed financial dealings with me in detail. He didn't, I said. He was careful about that. Did you ever suspect something was wrong? I paused. That was the hardest question. Yes, I said finally. But I didn't know what. There was silence after that. Heavy, loaded silence. And then they thanked me, and I stepped down. My shoes made a soft clicking sound on the floor, but it felt deafening in the quiet room. I didn't stay for the full hearing. I didn't need to. I knew what the outcome would be. The evidence was overwhelming. No jury in the world would see him as innocent. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps and watched people pass by. Strangers with their own stories, their own heartbreaks. I wasn't special in my pain. But I had survived it. That had to count for something. I walked to the parking lot, got into my car, and just sat there. The air smelled like cold and cigarette smoke. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Same face. Different eyes. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea, turned off my phone, and read the last letter from the stack Terrence had sent. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was more of a farewell. I know I can never fix what I broke, he wrote. But I hope one day, you'll remember the parts of me that tried. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer I never opened, and went to bed. Months passed. Terrence was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He received a sentence that would keep him behind bars for the foreseeable future. The court seized assets connected to the fraud, including a few accounts he had tried to hide overseas. His name was scrubbed from the company's records, and the professional world he had spent 2 decades building turned its back on him overnight. But none of that was my revenge. My revenge started quietly, almost without intention. It started the morning I sat down at the kitchen table, now stripped of the glossy granite centerpiece Terrence had once insisted on, and opened my laptop. I began to write, not a diary, not angry letters, but the whole story. All of it. From the night at Fiore's to the final courtroom appearance. It was clunky at first. I wasn't a writer, not in the traditional sense. I had worked in education for years, helping at-risk students find their footing in a system stacked against them. I knew how to tell stories, just not my own. But there was something in the act of writing that made the knots in my chest loosen a little each day. I started a blog. I didn't use our real names. I didn't out anyone directly. But I was honest. Raw. I painted the picture exactly as it happened. And people responded. Messages started pouring in. From women, mostly. Some had been through worse, others were still stuck in the fog. They thanked me. They told me my story gave them language for what they were feeling. A few asked for advice. One sent me a message that simply read, "You reminded me I'm not crazy." One of my former students, now working at a publishing company in New York, stumbled on the blog. She reached out and said, "Cass, I think this needs to be a book." I laughed at first. But she wasn't joking. It took a year. The process was slow, full of rewrites, doubt, and coffee-stained notes. But when the book was finally published, it found its audience. Women's groups invited me to speak. Podcasts asked for interviews. Someone from a local university reached out and asked if I'd consider teaching a course on personal narrative. I said yes. And then came the best part. A production company, known for adapting memoirs into limited series, reached out with interest. I almost deleted the email, thinking it was spam. But it was real. The project moved quickly. I worked closely with the scriptwriters, insisted on staying involved. I didn't want my story sensationalized, I wanted it truthful, with the quiet tension of real life. The moments between the explosions. When the series aired, it wasn't a blockbuster. But it struck a chord. The actress playing me, older, elegant, with eyes that carried weight, was nominated for a regional award. The show received praise for its realism, its refusal to tie things up in a neat bow. One day, I got a letter forwarded through my publisher. Handwritten. No return address. I recognized the scrawl. Terrence. I saw the series, he wrote. You told the truth. I hated watching it, but I couldn't stop. You were always stronger than I let myself believe. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't in the conviction or the frozen accounts or the cancelled credit cards. It wasn't even in the embarrassment he must have felt watching his fictional double fall apart on screen. My revenge was simple. I built something out of the rubble he left behind. Not just a book, or a show, or a teaching gig, but a voice. A place in the world that wasn't defined by his betrayal, but by what I did with it. And the best part? Every royalty check, every speaking engagement, every classroom discussion that bloomed from my story, his name wasn't on any of it. He took my savings, my peace, my trust. But I turned his lies into something that mattered. That's what he'll have to live with. Every day. Knowing that the truth, my truth, is louder than his best performance ever was.